Hello, and welcome to today's live stream. It's the weekend, and I think I need some more light. Hey, there we go. Hair's getting so long. Need a haircut, probably just like everyone else. But hey, my wife said she doesn't disapprove of the long hair, so it might stick around for a little longer. Let's see. Okay. Today we're going to tie the Greenwell from Pryce Tannat. This is an AJ Wright, not AJ Wright. This is a J Wright pattern as described in Pryce Tannat. I realized I've been tying a lot of Pryce Tannat recently, so I'm going to try to tie more other authors, but no guarantees. I don't know. I think one of the things about the Pryce Tannat patterns is that they are I would say more accessible, but they're not necessarily more accessible because of the material lists or what's in them. I think they're just more accessible because they're more familiar to us as to like what a classic Atlantic salmon fly looks like and how it ties and the various parts. Some authors, I'm specifically thinking of like Francis or Ephemera, Blacker. The descriptions of the flies in those works are less accessible because they're described differently. And I know Pryce Tannat has its oddities too, but a lot of Pryce Tannat's flies have been translated into kind of the modern recipes that we know, and so they're a little bit easier to for people, and particularly beginners, to understand. So I tend to tie a lot of Pryce Tannat for I think that reason. But I also tie a lot from Blacker and from Ephemera. So it's I don't know. It's one of those things where a lot of people start with the Hardy patterns or the Pryce Tannat patterns, or the Kelson patterns, and then they'll branch out into some of the more obscure and older patterns. I think that's just kind of natural progression of things. A couple quick announcements. If you want to see more of my work, head on over to Instagram at justwondering.brad. If you want to support the stream, check out my Etsy shop. All of the money that I get from my Etsy shop comes back to the channel to upgrade my technology, buy more materials, buy more hooks, and just make general quality of life improvements for the stream and for the channel. My Etsy shop is Studio1213, and like I said, all the money comes back to the channel. I'm very fortunate that I don't have to rely on my fly tying for income. This is not my day job. So, what else? On my Instagram, we're making a run for 500 followers. Like I've said, we've been stalled out at 450. It's one of those things. I think right now, especially, there's a lot of like spam accounts on social media, and so although I've had a lot of new followers, I think a lot of those new followers have ended up being kind of these spam accounts that are not real people, or they are real people who are doing things which violate the community standards of Instagram, and so they get banned or taken off or whatever. So I've kind of been stalled out at 450, and that's cool. But like I said, when I hit 500, I've got a giveaway to do. So spread the word. There are flies. Actually, I think I can show you the flies. So the winner will get one of my magnetic cigar box display boxes. A little bit dusty. I'll clean off the dust, I promise. So this very nice Rocky Patel fly box inside, all decked out in green velvet, and then you'll get these 6 flies. These 4 are these are mom flies, Mary Orvis Marbury flies. You'll get 4 of these wet flies that I've tied. You might have seen them on the Instagram, and then you'll get one of my salmon flies. This is a freestyle designed and tied by me. So yeah, when we hit 500 followers, we'll give this away. And there may be more flies, maybe some surprises for whoever wins, but I ain't giving those away, otherwise they're not surprises. What other announcements? Do I have any other announcements? I don't think so. I will say I'm hoping very, very much that the fly tying season or the fly fishing season and the excuse me. I'm really hoping that the fly fishing show season will return in the fall. I really enjoy doing shows, and I've been thinking about maybe doing like Lancaster. That's actually fairly. It's not fairly close. It's a fair drive for me, and I prefer to go to shows that I can drive to. But I've been just thinking about doing maybe a few more shows this year. So keep an eye out. I can't guarantee that I'll be able to do more shows. Even with everything that's going on, with the pandemic, I am kind of in a transition in life in general. So can't guarantee that I'll be able to do more shows, but I would love to. I actually just got the show, the dates, the dates announcements for the fly fishing shows, the ones that Chuck Frimsky does. So I don't know. I might try to do a few of those. Haven't entirely decided. But yeah, I mean, hopefully the show season will be able to come back. All right, so the Greenwell has a silver tinsel tag. So as usual, we're going to do a double layer of tinsel. And I'm using fine silver flat tinsel for this. Now, the reason why we do 2 layers of tinsel is because inevitably when you're wrapping flat tinsel over a kind of imperfect surface or like a tapered surface, you're going to end up with gaps between the wraps. And by doing a double layer, you're pretty much assured of having silver, filling those gaps. All right. All I'm doing here with my thumb is I'm taking the thumbnail and I'm gently, not really burnishing the tinsel. I'm just making sure that all of the wraps are butted against each other and not like overlapping. So just smoothing it out, just making sure that there's no hard like edges or hard lumps or whatever. Then I'm just going to gently build up a little bit of thread base. Again, because we're using a double layer of tinsel, you always end up with a little extra bulk, or it's a little bit of just extra width to the layer of tinsel. And this is kind of a nice antique flat silver. Otherwise, like usual, I'm going to be using Lagarden tinsel. Let's see. The tail is a crest feather. I think. Oof. Sorry, kind of really dried out since we turned on the air conditioning. All right, so to prepare the crest for use in the tail, I always just trim away all the excess fibers, and I only trim them down to like stubble. Because as always, that stubble helps center the tail on the hook. So just going to trim. So there you can see, you might be able to see, nope, that's not very good. But you can see, how I've trimmed this crest feather. And I've just left that stubble. I'm mount it on the center of the hook. So this feather has ever so slightly a bit of twist to it, which is fine. Not a big deal. So before I go on, just to make sure the tail doesn't move while I tie on the rest of the stuff, I'm going to wax my thread, take a couple turns, and trim the butt. And once you have things like, tail feathers set, you can. I go ahead and trim them because I feel like leaving the kind of the butt end of the feathers long does leave a little bit of risk of, if you catch that butt end of that the butt end of the feather with like some thread or some other materials, you can pull that tail out of alignment. And that's pain. It's not unsolvable, but it can be a real pain. Other people like to trim everything at once because then you end up with a very neat kind of trimmed line almost. I don't think that's necessary. If you're using waxed thread, uh, it doesn't matter if you have a slight taper to your trimmed tail tie-in area. All right, so the tail of a Greenwell is veiled by two jungle cock eyes back to back. Very small eyes, so I get to use the small eyes in the neck area of the cape. And the question is, how small do you want to go? For tail veilings, most tail veilings tend to be half the length of the tail, or at least that's the way I like to tie them in. But because jungle cock eyes are very striking, I think I'll probably want to go for something that's only about quarter to a third of the length of the tail. So we're looking at something that's actually pretty small. These are not exact matches. They're pretty close. One is clearly larger than the other in terms of overall length, but I think the actual nails are pretty close in size. And they have the correct curvature, so you can see that they kind of curve opposite of each other. Wait. Yeah, they do. They should. Interesting. Let's look for another feather. Yeah. These a better fit? These might be better fit, although I don't quite have the same. All right, so that's pretty good. These are two jungle cock eyes, the two jungle cock eyes back to back, and you can see they match up pretty well. They'll go on like this. Hopefully they'll go on like that. I say, tying jungle cock eyes back to back is one of my least favorite things to do, because they are generally a little bit more finicky than other feathers I find to tie back to back. And part of that is because the stems on jungle cockeyes are fairly round, but they're round in like the wrong direction. So when you flatten the stem of a jungle cock, it wants to flatten, I think, horizontally, whereas in this case, I need it to go vertically. So I generally don't flatten the stems on jungle cockeyes, and I use the tie-in method where I tie in a little bit of the extra like webbing or like extra fibers. But that's not possible when you're trying to tie them in back to back. So it can be a little bit more of a challenge. It's not impossible. These are not quite right on the fly as they are, but so I will, but I don't want to fiddle with them too much because they're, good enough, and they're pretty stable where they are. So I also think they're being influenced a little bit. Like I said, this tail that I have, even though it's a straightened crest, there's just a little bit of twist in it. I think that's because it is very humid in here. So, but that's pretty good. That works. That definitely works for me. All right. So what's next? Oh yeah, and by the way, this is a, I believe it's a 5/0 Ron Lucas Jock Scott. Don't quote me on that though, because I threw away the packaging to this hook a long time ago, and this was originally tied as a fly, and I didn't like the fly as much as I thought I would, so I rescued the hook. But so I'm pretty sure this is a Jock Scott hook. I'm not 100% certain. So and the ostrich herl butt. I'm going to tie in as much of a butt as I can. Couple turns. Trim. Ostrich herl is pretty. Doesn't add a whole lot of bulk when you're tying it in and out, so don't feel the need to be too careful. And besides, we're gonna double layer the floss, and also there's gonna be a ton of ribbing on this fly. So I have here a brand new spool of Garden medium flat tinsel, or medium flat silver. The ribs on the Greenwell are described as broad flat silver and silver twist. Now, I think silver twist could be any kind of round tinsel. Just a notch. Don't want this spool to unspool completely on me, so so silver twist could be any kind of round silver. Generally, I think of twist as being like round silver, like literally round silver. Although I'm going to use oval today, just because that's what I have in a larger, slightly larger size. But anyway, I've got medium. This is medium. I'm not going to use the super large tinsel because that would be a little bit overpowering, especially since it's got two ribs. And then I'm using small Lagarton oval as the second rib. Now there's the saying, the first on, last down, and basically what that's referring to is if you have to tie in multiple ribs on a fly, any fly, not just a salmon fly, but any fly, the first thing you tie on will be the last thing you wrap. So if I want the oval silver tinsel to be, behind the broad flat tinsel, then I need to tie that on first. And essentially, what I think of that, or how I think of that, is I think of the hook as like the face of a clock, right? And so if you think of the clock as going, clockwise is this way around the fly. So if the face of the clock is pointed this way, clockwise is this way, counterclock is this way. I kind of think of the first rib goes on around 6 o'clock. I actually put it tie in around 6:30, just because when you start wrapping, there's always going to be a little bit of time where the rib has to like catch up essentially to become visible. And besides, you don't want like the bulk. It's a little bit unsightly just from a wrapping standpoint, particularly with flat silver or rather flat tinsel, any color, but flat tinsel in general. Because when you tie in flat tinsel, you tie it in flat, but then when you go to wrap it, you have to fold the tinsel over in order to get it to wrap flat. And that always creates a little bit of extra bulk. So I tend to tie my ribs towards the back of the hook. So in this kind of first on, last down principle, I'll tie in the oval silver tinsel on first because that'll be the second rib. And I'll tie in the flat silver tinsel second because that'll go down first. But so if the oval tinsel gets tied in at like 6:30, the flat silver tinsel will get tied in around 7:30, depending on how broad it is. It might have to be tied in around 8. And I always create I'll show you. I always add a taper in, so you can see like a tapered edge, and I tie it in by the very tip. And that just reduces the bulk at the tie-in point just a little bit. I know some people that take it quite extreme. This could actually probably be a little longer looking at it now. Nope. There we go. That just reduces the bulk at the tie-in point. Let's see. a little bit hard to see because that tip disappears, but it is a pretty thin tip. And like I said, because you tie in flat tinsel flat, but then have to fold it in order to wrap it flat, that little bit of taper just helps reduce the bulk at that turnaround point. I'm always just going to double check and make sure everything stays aligned. I'm going to wrap my thread forward to where the second wrap of rib will go, and that's where I'll tie in my hackle. Actually, scrap that. This has got a floss body, so I can do the tie the hat. I can use the floss of the floss body. Ow, man, that tinsel is sharp. I can actually use the floss from the body to tie in the hackle. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'll show you how that's done. So I'm just going to wrap down, again, using the thread to just smooth everything out and make sure there's no fuzzies or anything. It's a little less important under a... It's more important how, I guess, even the body is, and not necessarily how smooth the underbody is under a floss body. Again, because you can smooth out the body. You can smooth out a floss body either by burnishing or just careful wrapping. But you can't solve any major kind of topography that makes it into your underbody. Okay. That wrapped, I've got pale blue floss. We're doing a whole body, so I'm going to need actually quite a bit of this. Yeah, I'm just having trouble with the notches. There you go. All right, so pale blue floss. And actually, before I wrap my body, well, first off, this is Lagarten silk. Comes in 3-ply, so I'm just going to find the single ply, pull it apart. So I have 2 plies, 2 spare plies. Those will go into my box of extras. Use those later. Yeah, and then I have a single ply. So I'll tie that in. All right. So that's silk for the body. And before I start wrapping the body, I'm actually going to prep my hackle, my body hackle. And I'm going to be using this light blue from feathersmc.com. I want to select a fairly, ideally I would like a very nicely tapered hackle. with fibers that aren't too long, although the throat on the Greenwell is teal, or is Widgeon, but I'm going to use teal. And I can get teal with fairly long fibers if necessary, so don't need to. I can worry a little less about how long the longest fibers will be on the body hackle, but I still want a nicely tapered body hackle. The other consideration is this is a 5/0 hook, so I can actually tie a little bit larger. I may want to tie a little bit larger. I think this hackle, take a look. Yeah, so that's a fairly nice taper. I don't know if you can see. Fairly nice taper. Maybe a little less taper here, but that's okay because that'll be towards the front of the fly. Tied in by the tip. I think this one will be pretty good. Although, yeah, no, that's a clean hackle. Felt a little bit like there's a bump, like a growth, like a barring that you'd sometimes get in a tail feather or wing feather, but I think that's just a couple hackle fibers that got crossed over. All right, so this hackle is ready to go. Essentially, what I'll do is I'll just pull back the fibers and I'll tie it in by the very tip. And I'll use the silk for the body to tie it in. And as usual, I'm not using gloves. I wash my hands so they're nice and clean. It is a little bit. It's a pretty humid day out, so I think I'm going to be a little bit more careful. But in general, if you have clean hands, you don't need to wear gloves to wrap silk. You can. I know people do it, but I prefer to not wear gloves because I like to be able to feel how the silk is going on. You can definitely feel whether you're starting to get like a twist, and oftentimes you can feel a twist beginning to develop before you can see it. Yeah. The only time I guess I would consider wearing gloves is if my hands were particularly rough, and they aren't. Now, if you have rough hands, you can also use like one of those pumice stones to smooth out your fingers. A lot of people have them for cracked heels and that sort of thing. So I'm just wrapping on the silk, single ply silk. Doing it as flat as I can. And each wrap butts right up next to the one previous. So there's no overlap. Just get into the butt and the things. One wrap, and then the way I like to do the crossover for going back is I like to put the crossovers on the back side of the hook. And that just avoids building up any kind of bump or bulk above or below the hook. All right, so I'm going to wrap the silk back. Maybe a little too far. About there, I think. And then I've on these Hackle pliers have padded jaws, so they won't cut the silk or fray it. But I just want to add a little bit of weight there to hold it in place. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the hackle and I'm going to tie it in at approximately this 7 o'clock, 6:30 to 7 o'clock on the hook. And I'm just going to use the silk to tie it in. So, you can use a silk-like tying thread. Essentially it is tying thread, just a little bit thicker. And because it's got such good surface contact, and because the silk will tend to, it doesn't stick with itself, but like the fibers of the silk will kind of mesh into the previous layer or the under layer of silk a little bit. You actually get pretty solid tie-in of the hackle. It's not quite as good as using my favorite waxed thread, but it is fairly solid. It's certainly better than using unwaxed thread. But we'll just wrap the body as normal. Back down. And I like doing it this way, where you use the silk from the body to tie in the hackle, because it makes it less. You don't have to fight the hackle or fight around the hackle in order to tie the silk. So if I were to tie in the hackle with my thread right here, and then try to wind the body around it, you'd have to contend with the hackle when you're wrapping the silk. So you'd have to wrap the silk around the hackle, and it's just easier if you use the silk for the body, to the silk floss to tie in the hackle. Now that only works for a silk body. You really can't do it with a tinsel body. And then if you're dubbing a seal fur body, then your tying thread's already there, so you don't have to worry about it. So it's a nice trick for a silk body. Okay, so using the principle of first on, last down. So the last bit of rib that I tied in was the flat silver. So I'm going to wrap the flat silver first. Just nice, even wraps of wide silver. This is fairly wide silver. And tie it off in the natural position. And flat silver always needs a few extra wraps, because, again, this stuff is fairly thick and springy, and so it needs to be securely tied in. And then second rib, so the oval silver was the first thing I tied in, so it's the last thing to go down. That just follows the back end, or the trailing edge of the broad flat silver. And you want to make sure that the oval silver is on silk and not on the flat silver, because if it's on the flat silver is just too slippery. It's not going to stay there, and you're going to end up with a whole bunch of extra slack almost in your oval silver, and that can throw off the rib and just make it sloppy. So. All right, now for the hackle. And just going to fold it on the fly. So what I'm doing is I'm pulling the hackle out, and then I'm just sweeping fibers towards the rear. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be enough so that the fibers don't get trapped under the stem going forward. You just want them to be going rearward. I'm going to wrap the hackle following the trailing edge of the oval silver tinsel. And tie it in, and see, I just wiggle my thread back and forth. That just makes sure I don't trap. I trap as few fibers as possible. Trim. Bind everything down. Smooth out that thread base. Actually, I'm going to unwind a few wraps because I want to, as always, wax my thread. I recently got a question on my Etsy of all places. I find that people tend to ask a lot of questions on Etsy, and it seems like a strange place to ask, these kinds of questions. But I suppose if people are on Etsy, if you're on my Instagram or on my YouTube, you're kind of looking for people who are tying classic flies. If you're on my Etsy and you just kind of stumble across my work, you might have a lot more questions, I guess. So I get a surprisingly large number of questions about classic Atlantic salmon flies on my Etsy. Quite a few of them, or most of them, tend to come from people who are not into fishing or not into fly tying. They just are very curious. But I got a question that was pretty good. It was about do people fish, still fish this style of fly? And the answer is yes. And how much are people willing to pay for, a fly like this to fish? And the answer is I don't really know. Most of the people I know who fish classic flies tend to tie their own. And so, it's whatever their costs of materials and however they value their time. But I have done commissions in the past for people who wanted to fish classic salmon flies or classic Mary Orvis Marbury flies. And I generally find that people are not willing to pay, these are expensive flies. If you think your average streamer, say, Carrie Stevens style streamer at an Orvis might go for $5 to $7. That's about what people are willing to pay for something like this. And I obviously can't sell these flies for that little. I have tied some Mary Orvis Marbury flies on like modern hooks using, massive numbers of substitutes for about $7 a piece. But I've had some people request, I want classic salmon flies tied with all the classic materials, and they pay full price for those. So yeah, these can be expensive flies to fish. They're expensive flies to tie, but they're expensive flies to fish if you're going to fish them. Yeah, it's just interesting. It's an interesting question about like what people are willing to pay for a fly that they might lose. Frankly, for a lot of people, guaranteed to lose. I would be dead. I am a bad fisherman. I'm not the world's best fly fisherman. I would be deathly afraid. I mean, I'd be almost guaranteed to lose a fly like this while fishing. All right, so the throat on the Greenwell is Widgeon. I'm using green wing teal, just slightly darker, more subtly barred green wing teal. You don't need a whole lot of wraps in this because it is very striking and very strongly. All right. And I am going to pull, I'm not going to pull the body hackle down to the bottom, but I am going to pull the throat, just because a throat like green wing teal or spotted guinea fowl, galena, can be a little bit difficult to tie like underwings through. But like a normal body hackle or a normal cock hackle for a throat is not such a big problem. But these kind of thicker duck or guinea fowl hackles can be. So there we go. That's the body and hackle of the Greenwell. And we are going to whip finish the white thread, and I'm going to switch to black thread for the wing. However, we're going to do we'll tie the wing next week, because today's stream has already gone almost an hour, and most of that was just me gabbing at the camera. But there we go. That's the body. Very nice start to a very nice fly. This is actually a fly that I've never tied before. I'm doing a whole series of flies that I really admire the pattern, but I've just never had the opportunity, or I've just never tied them for whatever reason. Mostly because I haven't had the correct materials. But yeah, so the silver gray that I tied a couple weeks ago, this fly. And then the Dusty Miller, which I didn't tie on stream, but I posted on my Instagram. Those are all patterns that I really love, but just haven't tied for whatever reason. So rectifying that, here's the body for the Greenwell. We'll do the wing next week. And yeah, thanks for hanging out. Like I said, on Instagram at justwondering.brad. Support the stream on my Etsy shop, Studio1213. And share the Instagram with your friends. When I hit 500 followers, I'm doing a giveaway. So yeah, thanks for hanging out. Hope you have a great weekend. Just a reminder, again, we'll finish the Greenwell next week on stream. And yeah, take care and stay healthy and stay safe.